Hello and welcome to our joint program with Real News and Newsclick. We have with us today Harsh Mander and will discuss 1 year of Modi regime, particularly with respect to how it has affected the working people. Harsh, good to have you with us. We are going to discuss what has been a media hype, 1 year of Modi, what all things have happened, good things and so on. What has its regime's been impact on the working people, the agricultural workers, the peasantry, as well as the workers in the urban areas?
See, for workers, for farmers, for farm workers, for the unorganized sector overall, it's been a grim year. And I think that we're just seeing the beginnings of a set of policies which, cumulatively, if we hurl down the same direction, its impacts are going to be very, very far-reaching for India's impoverished and oppressed millions. We've had a government led by Manmohan Singh in the UPA for the last 10 years, which certainly also believed that markets will ultimately be a solution to problems of the poor. But they'll have to wait long enough, for it to unfold. But the UPA government, especially in the first 5 years, because also of the influence of the left, but even in the remaining 5 years, had begun to build a very imperfect, incomplete, but very significant globally, an infrastructure of legally enforceable rights of the poor, for them to mediate and ensure some basic life of dignity even while markets played out. And so we had the right to information, a qualified right to work in NREGA, the right to education, the right to food. With all its imperfections, they still were very significant rights. What I see happening in this regime, firstly, is the demolition by stealth of all of these.
The labor rules will be enforced only by the corporate certifying that they are okay, that they are not violating labor laws, that the environmental laws would be observed by the corporate sector saying they are okay with this, they are not violating it. So in fact, removing corruption into structural inequality, in that sense, that is one part of what the Modi government is doing. Do you see that this is really the trajectory they are following in terms of the various laws that had protected environment and labor rights and other rights for the people?
If you see your primary client as formal big corporations, as government, what do big corporations want? They want cheap and submissive labor. They want cheap land without any kind of resistance. They want to not be bogged down by environmental laws. They don't want to pay taxes. That's the kind of regime that they dream of, and which under Mr. Modi's leadership, Gujarat did accomplish to a fair degree. So we had actually the largest amount of labor unrest, very low wage levels, highly depressed, suppression of any kind of dissent around land acquisition and so on, and huge public subsidies to the corporate sector, which are mind-boggling, to the Tatas, the Adanis, the Ambanis, and very low public investment in health and education. So within this, unpack a little bit the labor reforms, what are called labor reforms. Firstly, the word reform is so disingenuous, because reform seems to suggest that you're getting to something better, whereas labor struggles over most of the 20th century were around building protections for workers against capital, which is much more powerful. And the last 20 years have seen us rapidly demolishing all of these in the name of reform. And we're being told that is in the interest of labor because they'll get more employment. I find that particularly amazing in the Indian context, because 9 out of 10 workers are outside the protection in any case. They are unorganized workers. So you have less than 10% of the workers in the formal workforce, of which 6% are in government. So you're talking about 3 to 4% of the workforce, which are controlled by a set of labor legislation which is very weakly enforced by a very under-equipped and under-motivated corrupt labor department. So actually you're not really controlled at all, and yet that is what they want further demolished. And so the result of what Rajasthan will do is that I'm told the right to form unions, and the 4,700 units, I'm told that almost 4,000 units now will fall outside. And also standards of health and safety of workers and other protections fall outside the purview now of even the very weakly enforced labor protections that the labor movement has fought for so long. So we're seeing this. I mean, if you're looking at agriculture, we have about, directly, indirectly, about 60% of the workforce still in agriculture, contributing just 15% of the GDP. So already very, very low levels of productivity. And in the UPA government, an average of about 5% of public spending alone on the 60% of the population. And much of that 5% was also subsidies to big farmers. So the large mass of the working small and marginal peasantry in rain-fed areas are seeing less and less of public investment. Now, even those public investments have been brought down further in the last year. The MSP was one of the most important protections that, for better or for worse, the last government at least was able to ensure that the minimum support price, because we don't have other income protection for farmers, the minimum support price for wheat and rice have constituted a certain kind of framework of some protection, that if the markets collapse, if global markets have a problem. But the MS Swaminathan committee had said very clearly that the MSP should be fixed at 50% above the cost of production. Now, what we are seeing is that the costs of inputs have been rising, but the government has actually not increased the MSP. It's been very weak in incentivizing the states for MSP. So, if you go into the countryside, actually one of the biggest, the anger of the farmer is about the minimum support price. So we've seen that demolished. We've seen the NREGA being weakened. The amount of wage days created is almost 60% below. So again, it's a killing by stealth. They're not going to close down the program, but you start delaying your releases to the state so much that if I have worked, I don't get my wages for 3 months, 6 months. So a point comes when I cannot rely on the NREG any longer. So over the next year or two, what we're going to see is that people will go back into distress migration, abandoning the protection that NREG provided. And then the government will say, but there's no demand for the NREG. Very briefly also about the Food Security Act, which is another protection. The Food Security Act actually was required to be unrolled by the Act within 1 year, which was September 2014. The government has, without going back to Parliament, extended the date, which is completely illegal. You can't do that just by administrative order. So you don't care about even a law passed by Parliament. Its budgets are not sufficient. There's a 50% cut in the ICDS. There's almost no provisioning for the universal maternity benefits that the Act was supposed to supply. Midday meals have been under provision substantially. And it's a complete lie to say that the states will now, because we've transferred more tax, the central tax is 10% more to the states, so they'll have the resources. What they're not saying is that the centrally sponsored schemes, which were also transferred to the states, have been cut back. And the nature of state support, which is the revenue, what is called revenue expenditure support, which is largely around salaries, is now not going to be given in future by the center to the states. What that means is that in the social sector, teachers' salaries, health workers, Anganwadi workers, a lot of the expenditure in health and education and nutrition is built around salaries, which is not going to be protected by the center.
One is that your demolition of rights, as you talked, which is really in different ways. The NREGA program, which is basically a labor support in rural areas. You talked about right to food, that being not what was originally planned is not being still implemented.
Right to education.
Right to education is being cut. The other part you talked about is that given that the states are supposed to do large part of originally the central schemes, the resources that have been transferred are really much less than what was originally being provided. So a net cut back.
What has been calculated is that just about less than about 0.7% of GDP increase in the total quantum of income available to the states, with which they are expected to actually, deal with a 50% cut in ICDS, 21% cut in education budgets, etc., across the board, healthcare, which is just impossible. So ultimately, what the center is going to say, if this whole framework of social and economic rights is breaking down, it's the states which are to blame.
So that's a part of it, that you don't transfer enough resources and you transfer the burden onto the states. But at the same time, the other issues that you are talking about, which is the fact that there is no investment made in agriculture. If you look at what's happened in agriculture today, that actually GDP growth in terms of agriculture is virtually zero, if not negative. It also, the incomes are not sufficient. You can see already negative growth in terms of what are called the FMCG, fast moving consumer goods, for which 60% is the rural market. So that has also dipped. So you have a situation on top of which you also have what would be called, the unseasonal rains, which have led to large scale crop damage. So all of that is impacting Indian agriculture very heavily.
Extraordinarily so, and to all the sort of litany of challenges, I'd add a couple more. There's also a squeezing on formal credit availability to farmers, from the days of bank nationalization, we've seen a continuous contraction of credit availability. So on the one hand, your technologies which you have promoted in much of the countryside require high cost inputs which are rising. You've squeezed the amount of credit available. You have no income protection or farmer insurance schemes. You have both the uncertainties of weather and climate, but also the uncertainties of a sudden integration with the global market. So everything might be okay, but prices may have fallen in Mexico or something, but which you have neither the knowledge or any control over, and your prices crash. And so again, farming has become such an impossible kind of profession. There's been a study which says that about 9 to 10 million people have migrated over the last permanently out of agriculture. On an average, about 2,000 to 3,000 people are leaving agriculture every day. And when I travel in the countryside, it's like young people are fleeing in Indian villages. The old and the very young remain because they feel this is, it's almost like this is a dying civilization, and whoever has the strength and the capacity to escape has to escape. But where do they escape? They escape into the cities, into the shanties, onto the streets, into unprotected work, and it's a trap on both sides. This is anyway the direction that we were going, but this government is much more unambiguous and much more surgical in pushing us in the direction that we are. There is
this argument about the Jan Dhan Yojana and also about various insurance schemes the government has introduced. So what do you think about?
It is really straightforward a fraud on the Indian people. None of the three schemes have any significant public contributions. These are basically you're giving you schemes for which you contribute as poor unorganized workers. Now you think of a context in which the majority of our workers, the unorganized workers, don't have a fixed employer. They are continuously sort of uncertain about who and where they'll get work. And Jon Bremen has used this very, very evocative term, the hunters and gatherers of work. So any kind of work in any terms at any corner of the country, and I've gone to Arunachal and deep interiors of in the middle of militancy in Kashmir, and you find somebody from Bihar and somebody from Chhattisgarh, young boys of 15, 16 trying to keep their families alive. Now in that context, where are you expecting that I would be able to contribute, open a bank account, contribute 1,000 rupees, which you're going to give back to me as the great scheme? If you look at the fine print of the pension scheme, it's also extraordinary that you won't, if you die after 55, you won't get the insurance. It's etc. etc. It's been built around everything to make it profitable for the
insurance
companies, and based on poor people's contributions, not the state. And then we are presenting this as a social security program. It's nonsense. And the fact that again it's not being interrogated is to me a sign of the times. I feel particularly about this, the trade unions need to really speak out. And that's why we've been saying that we need, where you have 90% of the workforce in the unorganized workers, we need a tax-based public, based on public spending, a social protection program of pensions and of insurance. And even wealthy countries like Sweden have gone in for a public-funded insurance program and pension program. I think in a country of where with unorganized workers at this scale and footloose workers, it is only a public-funded insurance scheme that we can be we can be proud of, and we can really call genuinely some kind of universal social protection.
Thanks, Harsh, for this discussion on the kind of assaults we have seen on the social sector, particularly on the working people in India. We'll come back to you on another discussion regarding what has happened to the constitutional values in the country. Thank you so much for watching our program, and we'll be back with Harsh Mander on the kind of attacks we are seeing on the constitutional values in the country, on the kind of state we had thought we will build after independence. Keep watching Newsclick and our collaboration with Real News.